Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Claire Bratton, and today I'll be discussing with you Chapter 6 on assault and sexual assault. So what are our chapter goals? We shouldn't forget all of these important points. First, crime against persons are essentially four types. Taking a life, for example, murder or homicide. Unwanted sexual invasions, for example, sexual assault. Bodily injury, for example, assault. And personal restraint, such as kidnapping and unlawful restraint. Second point we should consider is that rape is second only to murder as a serious offense. Third, the vast majority of people who experience rape are raped by acquaintances. Fourth, rape is a general intent crime. And 5, stalking is a more recent crime in the law. Let's look at the common law definitions of battery, assault, and mayhem. There are distinctions between the three types of offenses. First, battery. Battery is the unlawful application of force to another person. So battery in common law corresponds to what we all perceive as assault. Okay, so battery requires the infliction of bodily harm or offensive touching on someone else. Let's look at this case of bodily harm. Jerry is angry at Tom. Jerry walks up behind Tom and without warning hits Tom with a club. Tom is knocked unconscious. This is battery by the infliction of bodily harm. Let's look at this next case. Forrest is riding an elevator with Julianne, an attractive co-ed. Forrest pats Julianne on the butt. This would constitute battery by offensive touching. Now, common law definition of assault is either a threatened or attempted battery. Let's look at attempted battery. Ron swings at Mike from behind. Mike moves at the last moment. Ron misses. So this is just attempted battery because Ron was unable to inflict any physical injury on Mike because Mike moves at the last minute to duck or avoid the punch or the hitting from behind of Ron. The second type of assault is threatening conduct causing unreasonable apprehension of imminent harm on victim. Ron, in a rage, shakes his fist in Mike's face, but does not swing. So here, Ron's shaking of a fist is a threatening gesture, which would make him liable under the common law for assault. So under the common law, threatening conduct need not be verbal or oral. Even gestures or bodily movement intended to cause fear on the part of the victim or intended to threaten the victim would constitute assault. Now, what is mayhem? Mayhem is violently depriving another of the use of his members to render the victim less able in fighting, either to defend himself or to annoy his adversary. Examples would be cutting off hands or fingers or gouging out eyes. Now, the Texas law of assault merged the common law concepts of battery and the common law concepts of assault into one crime. There is a simple assault, which is a misdemeanor offense, and aggravated assault, which is a felony offense. Under the Texas law, there are several types of assault. First, simple assault. Second, aggravated assault. Third, intoxication assault. Fourth, deadly conduct. Fifth, terroristic threat. And sixth, injury to a child, elderly individual, or disabled individual. Let's look at the three forms of assault under the Texas Penal Code. There is assault with bodily injury, assault by threat, and assault by contact. The first type is assault with bodily injury. This is a Class A misdemeanor. The mens rea, or criminal mind required, is intent or intentional, knowing, or reckless. The actus reus, or the actual conduct prohibited, is causing bodily injury to another, including the other person's spouse. Assault by threat is a Class C misdemeanor offense. The mens rea, or criminal mind required, is intentional or knowing. And the actus reus, the conduct prohibited, is threatening another with imminent bodily injury. What does imminent bodily injury mean? Imminent means that it is present and immediate. The threat will likely happen sooner instead of in the distant future. Assault by contact is a Class C misdemeanor. The mens rea required is intentional or knowing. The actus reus, or the criminal conduct prohibited, is causing physical contact with another, and the offender knows or reasonably should believe that the other will regard the contact as offensive or provocative. Let's look again at case illustrations for the first type of assault, assault by bodily injury. As I mentioned, the mens rea required is intentional, knowing, or reckless. The next case illustrates how recklessness can make you liable for assault by bodily injury. Tim drops a concrete block from the overpass of a highway. The block hits the roadway in front of Rhonda's automobile. Rhonda swerves to avoid the object, but runs off the road and hits a pole. Rhonda suffers a bloody nose and bruises. What crime did he commit? Now, Tim here acted recklessly. So what does reckless mean? A person is reckless when he is aware of the risk that conduct or his conduct will cause an injury, but he disregards the risk. So here, Tim was aware that his conduct or his act of throwing a concrete block from the overpass of a highway would likely cause injury to a driving vehicle or a passing vehicle, but he still disregards the risk and proceeds to throw the concrete block from the overpass. Hence, Tim is liable for assault by bodily injury. Note that negligence is not enough for assault, okay? Injuries from motorcycle or motor vehicle collisions, which only have a negligence mens rea, would result in a civil action or a civil case and not a criminal case. Now, what exactly does bodily injury mean? Under Section 1.07 of the Texas Penal Code, this means physical pain, illness, or any impairment of physical condition. So there has to be some type of physical discomfort or physical hurt, okay, or impairment of a physical nature. Anything mental or emotional or psychological is not considered bodily injury. What does impairment of physical condition mean? I'll give you examples. Loss of consciousness, bruises, sprains, and muscle aches. Anything that doesn't make you feel well or feel whole or feel normal, that would be an impairment of physical condition. Who is the victim? The victim is another person, including the offender's spouse. Now, the victim cannot be an animal. It's not considered assault by bodily injury if the victim is an animal. Instead, the offender who targets an animal victim would be liable for criminal mischief, reckless damage, or cruelty to animals. Assault by threat. The mens rea again is intentional or knowing. So here, the courts and the law looks at the intent of the offender and not the reaction of the victim. So regardless of the reaction of the victim, if the offender did not have the intent to threaten anyone, there is no assault by threat. Let's look at this case. Pam is walking alone on the way from the library to her apartment. She hears a noise behind her and she sees Dan, who she does not know. Dan is dressed in goth-style attire. His sudden appearance frightens Pam. Pam becomes fearful that Dan will rob or assault her. Is Dan liable for assault by threat? What do you think, class? Well, here, Dan is not liable for assault by threat because he did not intend to threaten Pam, and Pam was just fearful. So assault by threat happens or occurs when the offender threatens another with imminent bodily injury. Let's look at this case. Craig approaches Mitch and warns Mitch, "You may be sorry one of these days." Is this assault by threat? Well, to answer this question, let's look at what threat means. Threat means a declaration of intention or determination to inflict punishment, loss, or pain on another, or to injure another by the commission of unlawful act. The threat must be related to bodily injury. For example, "I will hurt you." That would be a threat. And the prospect of injury is imminent, meaning that it is immediate and it is likely to happen. Hence, the only situation wherein a verbal threat may be imminent is when there is a face-to-face confrontation. The threat can be verbal or non-verbal, including gestures such as shaking the fist or brandishing a weapon. So going back to the case, "You may be sorry one of these days." Is this assault by threat? Let's break it down. You may be sorry. Sorry, why? So it could mean any of a number of things, right? It doesn't necessarily mean physical pain, okay, or physical loss or punishment, okay? And what does the phrase "one of these days" mean? It is also uncertain, meaning that it is not imminent, it's not immediate. One of these days is so vague, it can happen anytime in the future. So this is not assault by threat because it is not imminent bodily injury. Let's look at this next case. Dan, a college student full of beer and testosterone, recognizes Larry, a professional football player, standing at the end of the bar. Dan walks up to Larry and says, "You are the fattest, most overpaid player in the league. You have ruined my fantasy league season. You should have your butt kicked, and I'm the guy who's going to do it." Larry, the football player, looks at Dan and sees a 5'7" drunk college student. He laughs. Despite Larry's finding humor in the incident, has Dan committed an assault by threat? Does it matter that Larry was not placed in fear of threat or in fear of Dan? So here, the answer is yes. Dan has committed an assault by threat because the law looks at the intent of the offender and not necessarily the reaction of the victim, okay? Let's look at this next case. Dan says to Paul, "If you were not so stupid, I would punch you in the nose. Is this an assault by threat? Let's break it down. Is there a threat of an imminent bodily injury? What is he actually saying here? Okay. The third type of assault is assault by contact. The mens rea required is intentional or knowing. Recklessness is not punishable. Okay, so if, for example, walking down the street on the hallways when it's crowded and accidentally pushing someone, where it's not intentional or knowing, but maybe reckless or negligent, there's no assault by contact. Consented contact is not punishable. For example, everyday social contact, walking in crowded roads, or like, let's say you're in South by Southwest or Austin city limits, or in a concert where you have to rub elbows with people because everybody's so like shoulder to shoulder. That would not be assault by contact. Another example would be sports. For example, football, basketball, when the players engage in contact with one another, that is consented and it's not assault by contact. So there has to be physical contact with another, though. Let's look at this case. Dan knows that Pam is afraid of snakes. Dan waves a pet boa constrictor in front of Pam. Pam screams. Is this assault by contact? No, because the snake did not actually or go into physical contact with Pam. Dan simply waved it in front of her. The third element is that the offender knows or reasonably believes that the victim will find the contact offensive. For example, you are attending a Christmas party at a private home. You do not know that you are standing under a sprig of mistletoe. A complete stranger gives you a kiss. Is this assault by contact? Would the offender know or reasonably believe that you, the victim, would find the contact offensive? It would depend on the circumstances, traditions, customs of the place. What usually happens when someone is standing under the mistletoe? What are the expectations? Okay, so you have to answer all of these things. Now, simple assault can be aggravated in two conditions, in which case it is transformed from a simple misdemeanor offense to a felony in the second degree. Two situations of aggravated assault are, first, assault by serious bodily injury. So what does it mean? A bodily injury is serious if it creates a substantial risk of death or causes death. It causes serious permanent disfigurement. It causes prolonged injury, loss, or impairment of the functions of a bodily member or organ. So the injury must be grave and not trivial. Examples are death, skull fracture, fractured nose, loss of ear, loss of teeth, loss of eye, broken finger, hip or pelvis, broken arm or leg, shattered cheekbone, dislocated toe, extreme dehydration, internal bleeding, and stab wounds. The second form of aggravated assault is exhibiting or displaying a deadly weapon. So how do we know if a weapon is a deadly weapon? A deadly weapon is, first, a firearm. So a firearm is a device that expels a projectile through a barrel and uses energy from an explosion or burning substance. Or it can be any device readily convertible to that use. Another definition of deadly weapon is anything designed, made, or adapted for causing death or serious bodily injury. Third, anything that in its manner of use is capable of causing death or serious bodily injury. So these two situations or conditions elevate the crime from simple assault to aggravated assault. Let's look at this case. Al, seeking revenge against Jack for a stock investment tip that went sour, attacks Jack and beats him continuously with his fists. When the attack ends, Jack goes to the medical emergency room where he is diagnosed with 2 black eyes, assorted bruises, and cuts. Is this misdemeanor assault with bodily injury, or do Jack's injuries constitute serious bodily injury? So what were his injuries? 2 black eyes, assorted bruises, and cuts. To answer this question of whether or not Jack is Jack experienced serious bodily injury or not, you have to look at the definition of serious bodily injury. So do the bruises, black eye, bruises, cuts, is it a prolonged injury, loss, or impairment? Is it a serious permanent disfigurement? Did it cause him substantial risk of death or cause death? In this case, probably not. Okay, these injuries are just simple bodily injuries that can heal within a couple days and did not cause permanent disfigurement on Jack. So Al would be liable for misdemeanor assault with bodily injury and not aggravated assault. Okay? Determining serious bodily injury occurs on an ad hoc basis. There are 2 factors considered by the courts. Was the injury permanent, long-term, or fatal? If yes, it would be serious bodily injury. Is the injury of such magnitude that it is worthy of sentencing the assailant to prison? If yes, then it would be serious bodily injury. So what are deadly weapons? Deadly weapons would be firearms, such as pistols, rifles, shotguns, etc. However, pellet pistols, BB guns, and water pistols are not considered firearms. Again, anything designed, made, or adopted for causing death or serious bodily injury would be considered a deadly weapon. For example, hand grenades and plastic explosives. Third, anything that in its manner of use is capable of causing death or serious bodily injury. So virtually any object can be a deadly weapon if, because of the way it is used by the offender, it can cause death or serious bodily injury. Some examples given in case law are a dead chihuahua, acid, HIV-infected semen, okay? And then persons who work in jails or correctional facilities. If these are the victims, it would be a 3rd-degree felony if an individual commits assault by contact against correctional or jail officers or employees through the use of human or animal bodily fluids or feces, regardless of whether they are HIV infected. So what are the issues in charging aggravated assault? Since there are 2 forms of aggravated assault, the prosecutor has a choice between charging aggravated assault by a serious bodily injury or aggravated assault by a deadly weapon. For example, Pam swings at Sam with a fireplace poker. The fireplace poker would be a deadly weapon because through the manner of its use, it could cause death or serious bodily injury. Okay? On the other hand, if Pam swings at Sam and breaks any of his bones, Pam could also be liable for aggravated assault by serious bodily injury. Another example of a case wherein the prosecutor can choose to charge aggravated assault by serious bodily injury or by deadly weapon is the following case. Larry shoots Mo with a rifle and the bullet shatters Mo's ribs. Here, the shattering of Mo's ribs would be serious bodily injury. At the same time, the use of the deadly weapon would be aggravated assault by a deadly weapon. The penalty is considered is that for a felony in the second degree. However, if the victim is a public servant in the official discharge of his duties, and the offender knows that the servant is officially discharging his duties, it would be a felony in the first degree. Also, if the victim is a security officer, witness, informant, or person who reports a crime, or is a public servant, the aggravated assault would be a felony in the first degree. What is intoxication assault? The elements of intoxication assault are, first, the mens rea has to be by accident or mistake. Okay. Second, the offender is operating an aircraft, watercraft, amusement ride, motor vehicle in a public place. Third element is that the offender is intoxicated. So what does intoxication mean? His blood alcohol level must be 0.08, or even if it's less than 0.08, let's say 0.06, but he has lost his mental and physical faculties through the use of drugs and alcohol, meaning he can't function normally. Fourth, he causes bodily injury to another. So that would be intoxication assault. Let's look at injury to a child, elderly individual, or disabled individual. So here, the offense is assault by bodily injury. However, it is elevated with enhanced penalties if the victim is a child 14 years old and below, or if the victim is an elderly individual 65 years or older, or if the victim is disabled or someone who is over 14 years who, due to age or mental or physical disease, defect, or injury, is unable to protect or care for themselves. Okay? Now let's look at deadly conduct. What are the elements of deadly conduct? The elements of deadly conduct are, first, the offender is reckless. Okay, his mens rea is reckless. Second, he engages in conduct. And third, his conduct places another in imminent danger of serious bodily injury. So all three elements must concur for you to be liable for deadly conduct by placing another in imminent danger. The second form of this deadly conduct is deadly conduct by discharging a firearm. What are the elements? The second form, first, knowingly discharging a firearm at an individual, habitation, building, or vehicle. Second element, recklessness of the offender as to whether the habitation, building, or vehicle is occupied. So disorderly conduct is a Class A misdemeanor. Let's look at consent to assault. Consent is a defense to assault, okay? It is also a defense to aggravated assault and disorderly conduct. How can consent be given? Through express consent, such as when you undergo medical surgery, medical treatment, you have to sign forms and waiver, or consent can be implied, such as when you engage in contact sports. Now, if the level of contact exceeds that to which a reasonable person would agree to, then consent is no longer assumed. Okay? And you would be liable for assault. For example, if you engage in a fight in the middle of a contact sport. Let's look at this next case. Terroristic threat. Dan, living in El Paso, telephones Pam at her home in Corpus Christi. Pam is not home, but Dan leaves a message on Pam's voicemail. This is your worst nightmare. I'm coming to your house and I'm going to kill you. Okay. Let's look again at the definition of threat. Recall that a few slides back, I told you that threat is a declaration of intention or determination to inflict punishment, loss, or pain on another, or to injure another by the commission of unlawful act. Okay, so here definitely there would be a threat. Okay, this is terroristic threat because the threat is not immediate or imminent. If it were immediate or imminent, meaning that Dan and Pam were face to face, it would be assault. Okay, assault by threat. So let's look at the elements of the crime of terroristic threat. The first element is that the person threatens to commit any offense involving violence to any person or property. Second, the mens rea, take note, is intentional. There has to be intent. It cannot be knowing, it cannot be reckless, it cannot be negligent. It has to be intentional. Third, the intent must be to achieve any of the following objectives. So there are 6 situations. Okay. First, intent to cause any type of reaction by an emergency agency. Second, place any person in imminent fear of serious bodily injury. For example, the previous example I gave you, phone messages. Okay. Third, prevent or interrupt the occupation or use of a building of another or another public place. For example, if the offender calls the school and makes bomb threats, that would be terroristic threat. Fourth, cause impairment, interruption of public communications or services. For example, poisoning the water supply. Fifth, place the public or substantial group of public in fear of serious bodily injury. And sixth, influence the conduct of the government of the state. Now, what is stalking? Stalking is repeated conduct, meaning there has to be a pattern of behavior or harassing incidents. Under the Texas Penal Code, there must be more than one occurrence, okay? And it includes following the other person. So what are the elements? Harassing conduct, including following. Second, the victim is placed in fear of injury or death to herself, property, or family. The standard would be, would the offender's conduct cause a reasonable person to be placed in fear? Would the victim feel that his life or safety were in danger? Okay. Now that we finished assault, aggravated assault, deadly conduct, and terroristic threat, let's go to sexual assault. Consider this case. Archie and Betty, both college students, have been out on several dates together. Late one Saturday night, after having consumed a large amount of alcohol, Archie and Betty found themselves in Archie's apartment. They begin kissing. Soon they are semi-naked. Before long, Archie is on top of Betty and attempts to engage in intercourse. Betty says nothing. Archie successfully enters Betty, at which point she says, "Don't, we shouldn't be doing this." Betty says nothing further, and Archie does not withdraw until a minute later after reaching orgasm. The two fall asleep. The next morning, Betty contacts the campus police and says that Archie raped her. Assume you are a prosecutor. Would you file criminal charges against Archie? This case illustrates the concept of consent, okay? When is it given? When is it withdrawn? Now, under common law, sexual assault or rape was the carnal knowledge of a female by a male, not her husband, forcibly against her will, okay? So what are some things we can see from this definition? First, there has to be carnal knowledge or penetration. Second, the victim must be a female. Third, the offender must be a male who is not the female's husband. Okay. Third, there has to be force and lack of consent. So under common law rape, the law was limited to female victims. It was legally impossible for the husband to rape his wife because under common law, the wife was the property of his husband. And fourth and third, the common law rape required force and lack of consent. What are the elements of Texas law of sexual assault? Number one, the offender causes sexual penetration or sexual contact, no matter how slight, okay, and ejaculation is not needed. So what would be the penetration or contact? First, contact or penetration between sexual organs, anus and mouth of the offender and victim, okay? And second, oral, vaginal, or anal sex, but not mouth-to-mouth kissing. In one case, in Carnes versus State, the court said that it was sexual assault of a child if the offender held his dog in a position to penetrate the victim. Second element of the offense of Texas law for sexual assault is that the victim is another person, including the offender's spouse. So under the Texas law of sexual assault, the spouse can be a victim. Okay. To recap, the offender can be male or female. The victim can be male or female. The victim can be spouse of the offender. Force is not a necessary element. And the focus is on lack of consent. What is consent? Consent is assent, in fact, whether express or apparent. Okay? Under the Texas law of sexual assault, section 22.011, instead of defining what consent is, they specifically identified and enumerated the instances wherein there is no consent. Okay? This covers all situations or scenarios wherein the Texas law of sexual assault said that any sexual intercourse or penetration between the offender and the victim is presumed without consent. First, the use of physical force or violence against the victim. Second, the threat of force or violence against the victim, plus the ability of the offender to do so. Third, unconscious victim or physically unable to resist, such as self-induced intoxication. Fourth, mental disease or defect of victim makes her or him unable to appraise the nature of the act or resist, so the victim doesn't really know that there's sexual intercourse. Fifth, the victim is unaware that sexual assault is occurring. For example, the victim is under anesthesia because of a medical procedure or surgery. Six, the actor intentionally impaired the victim's power to apprise or control the conduct by administering substance without the other person's knowledge. For example, the offender gives the victim alcohol or date rape drugs or any drug that makes her unable to resist, okay? Seventh, threat of force or violence against any person, not necessarily the offender or the victim, plus the ability to carry out that threat. Next, the offender is a public servant and he coerces the victim. 8, mental health or care services provider, and the victim is a current or former patient, plus the victim is emotionally dependent on the health service provider. So here you have the situation of a doctor-patient relationship. 10th, clergyman plus penitent, and the penitent or the victim has an emotional dependency on the priest or clergyman. 10th, the offender is a facility where the victim is resident unless they're married, okay? So let's look at sexual assault of a child. This happens when the child is a person or the victim is under 17 years old. It doesn't matter what the offender thought. It's automatically statutory rape. Let's look at this case. Pam, a 23-year-old female, performs oral sex on Dan, a 15-year-old male. Dan told Pam that he is 18 years old. What crime did Pam commit? It would be sexual assault of a child because Dan is a 15-year-old male. Hence, he is below 17 years old. He is a child under the law. Let's look at this next case. Dan comes home one day and finds his 15-year-old daughter, Dana, on the living room couch having sexual intercourse with Paul, her 16-year-old boyfriend. What is the liability of Paul? Paul would not be liable because of this specific defense to sexual assault of a child in Section 22.011E of the Texas Penal Code. So it is a defense that the offender is not registered as a sex offender and not convicted of sexual assault, and is not more than 3 years older than the sexual partner, and the victim is at least 14 years old. Okay? What is aggravated sexual assault? First, causing serious bodily injury or death to the victim. Second, threatening to cause serious bodily injury, death, or kidnapping to the victim or any person. Third, using or exhibiting a deadly weapon. Fourth, administering date rape drug. Fifth, the victim is under 14 years old. Sixth, the victim is an elderly person, 65 years or older. Seventh, the victim is a disabled individual. Okay, so the penalty is a felony in the first degree. Minimum of 5 to 99 years imprisonment plus a fine of, or life, plus a fine of $10,000. So what is the Texas Rape Shield Law? This is a defense to sexual assault. So what is one defense? First, that the intercourse was consensual, okay? So the Texas Rape Shield Law bars evidence of the victim's sexual reputation or prior sexual history with the offender. However, in certain situations, the prior sexual history with the offender is admissible. However, it can be admitted in trial only if the offender raises this prior sexual history with a judge and out of the jury presence, meaning there can't be any jury present, and if the judge conducts an in camera hearing or a hearing in his or her chambers out of the presence of the jury, that the value of the evidence clearly outweighs the danger of harm to the victim and of unfair prejudice to any party. Texas has a corroboration requirement, okay? Meaning that independent evidence of the sexual assault, aside from the victim's testimony, is required. So the victim's testimony alone is not enough to prove sexual assault unless the victim informed anyone of the offense within 1 year after the date it was committed. This corroboration requirement does not apply if the victim is 70 years old or younger, if the victim is 65 years or older, or if the victim is 18 years or older, but due to age, physical or mental disease, defect, or injury was unable to sustain himself, such as provide himself food, shelter, and clothing. Now let's look at indecency with a child. Indecency with a child requires that the victim is a child 17 years or younger, and there are two forms. First, sexual contact or sexual contact, and second, exposure. For sexual contact, there has to be touching through clothing of anus, breast, or genitals of the child, or touching of any part of the body of a child, including touching through clothing with the anus, breast, or genitals of any person. The second form of indecency with a child is the exposure of genitals of offender or child victim and the intent to arouse or gratify the sexual desire of any person. Okay? Indecent exposure is the exposure of anus or genitals with the intent to arouse or gratify sexual desire of any person. The offender in this case would be reckless about whether or not another is present who will be offended or alarmed by his act. Okay, so if any person, for example, downtown exposes his anus or genitals and he wants to arouse or gratify his sexual desire, and he's reckless about whether or not there are spectators or any other person who are present and who would be alarmed by his exposure, he would be liable for indecent exposure. The final crime is public lewdness. So here, this refers to consensual sex in a public place where the offender is reckless as to whether another is present who will be offended or alarmed. An example of this would be sex at the backseat of a car parked on a public street. This is a Class A misdemeanor. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. I hope you enjoyed our presentation today, and I'll see you next lesson.